André. I'm back with Amy. We're going to talk about sleep and mental health, which I think is such a fascinating subject. So I'm really looking forward to this. Amy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So, my name's Amy Ferguson. I'm from the University of Edinburgh and I'm the Network Scientific Coordinator for the Circadian Mental Health Network.
So we've seen this real kind of explosion in interest in sleep and mental health over the last few years. Yeah, why is it important? What's the relationship?
So, there's actually a two-way relationship between our mental health and our sleep, as well as our other internal rhythms that influence sleep and things like that. And it's becoming more and more evident that these bi-directional relationships are so important. A lot of the time, we've been focusing on just the mental health aspect or just the sleep aspect and bringing them together, especially hearing more from patients about how their rhythms and how their sleep have really been impacting them. Sometimes it triggers them, sometimes it gets worse when they're in certain states and all that kind of thing. It's become such a big thing for them that we really want to make sure that's being taken forward correctly.
Fantastic. I love that you're starting with lived experience and co-production. That's great. So there's this thing called circadian rhythm, circadian clock in sleep science. What's that?
So basically, circadian rhythms are these kind of internal 24-hour rhythms that keep us on time to our environment. So they help us survive the best way we can. So they react to light, to temperature, all these kind of seasonal changes so that we adapt to our environment. And they basically keep us in a nice, consistent rhythm so our body knows what to expect and what's coming up. So we get to sleep at the right time, we try and eat at the right time, things like that. And these internal rhythms are what basically keep us on time.
And I guess when we lived out in the wild and were hunter-gatherers, we kind of lived by the sun and the stars, and the kind of circadian rhythms are built around or evolved around that. And now we're in very different physical situations. So that must have an impact on our health in some way.
Exactly. So it's not even something that is unique to humans. You find this all the way out through nature from like bacteria, plants, people, all the way throughout. So these all rhythms all develop to help us survive in our natural environment and things like that. And obviously with all of these things of extra lights, so like looking at our phones at night, all these lights that you wouldn't normally get at night, or all of these like food availability that never used to happen, all these rhythms developed so that we were prepared for anything coming up and we were primed and ready to go. Whereas everything's kind of all at once, all the time now. So that can have an impact. And some people are more sensitive to all of those disruptions than other people as well.
So what do we know about different kind of mental health conditions and sleep? Is poor sleep more related to certain things than others?
Disruption to our rhythms and to our sleep is a core feature of most mood disorders and most mental health conditions. There are some conditions, things like depression and bipolar, where it's more of a feature, especially if you look at bipolar disorder in and of itself. When someone is manic, tend to sleep less, they're more energetic, and their rhythms are maybe a bit more stretched. They're on the go all the time, and that's their kind of thing. But whereas when they're in a depressive episode, their energy is so much lower and they're fatigued, and also like they'll have to sleep more as well. They feel like they have to sleep more, but they also can't sleep. And so it is quite a feature of bipolar disorder, definitely. But it is a core feature of most mental health conditions, is some kind of sleep disturbance or disruption to our internal rhythms.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. The tiredness that comes with a severe depressive episode is impossible to do anything about. So you've been looking at the kind of genetic aspects of this, and particularly circadian clocks. Tell us about that work.
So basically, the way the circadian clock works, it's all based on these genes that interlink with each other and have these feedback loops to try and keep everything on time. And it cascades down into working with all these other genes to get them to do what they're supposed to do in time. So basically, what I was trying to look at was, are changes in these genes found more often in people with mood disorders? And is that potentially where some of this disruption to our rhythms, or at least some of this extra sensitivity that some people with mental health conditions have to disruptions to their rhythms and sleep? Is it from part of a genetic basis of, do they have some extra vulnerability compared to people that maybe don't have those changes in those core clock genes?
And what did you find?
Fortunately, I had like a smaller sample size than I would have liked, but that is always the case with genetic studies. The influences can be so small that you need such a large sample to look at these things, but it does look like having changes in your clock genes that are likely to have an impact on the actual protein and the way it functions does have an association to certain mental health conditions, particularly bipolar disorder.
And I just want to finish by coming back to the kind of lived experience angle. We know that it's really important that we don't just involve lived experience in the process of research, but right from the start, think about the questions that we need to ask.
So one of the things that launched recently from the Circadian Mental Health Network was a mental health and body clock survey. And basically it was a public survey that was co-produced with people with lived experience of both disruptions to their sleep and their circadian rhythms, and people with lived experience of mental health as well. And basically the whole point of that survey was to gain interesting ideas of what people think research really should be looking at with sleep and rhythms and mental health across the board. So we've had answers from clinicians, people that support, people that have these conditions, as well as people with lived experience themselves of what's important to them and what research really should be looking at. So we're currently collecting all of that data. We're getting some really interesting common themes that people really want to know about. And in the future, we're hoping to then release this big top 10 list of these are the most important things that research should be looking at according to the experts.
Fabulous. Great work. Can I just get you to do an advert for the Circadian Mental Health Network? Because I know people listening might be interested in hearing more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Circadian Mental Health Network is a network built of researchers, clinicians, people with lived experience, support individuals, members of the public, to try and create a better understanding of the relationship between our rhythms, our sleep, and our mental health. And we're working to try and make sure that the voices of lived experience across the board are heard throughout this kind of field of research. And as well as that, we are trying to support ECRs, early career researchers working in this field to make sure all of those philosophies be carried forward into future research.
Brilliant. Brilliant work. Thanks a lot for sharing.
Thank you so much for having me.